Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello again, this is John Johnson, and you're listening to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. And on this episode, episode 19, I'm going to be talking a bit about romance. And there's obviously a lot that's been written about it. Songs have been written about romance. There are movies. It's all out there. It seems to be that with all of the suggestion about what it is, it wouldn't be confusing. But, it is. What romance is, and I'm just going to give you a definition, it's the part of communication, it's the part of the relationship where you are bonding. That's romance. That's kind of broad and it's kind of general, but think of it from the point of view from each individual and what they're willing to invest in it. When you're a guy, you are told that romance is about wooing the woman. It's about giving her gifts of affection, appreciation, rings, flowers, cakes, taking her places, doing all of those kinds of things in order to get the relationship going and to create some sort of ongoingness to it. And I think if you're a woman, romance for a guy might appear to be, okay, he wants sex. Those are two fairly easy to come across, easy to define things, and that's a generality, and it's just one of those, it's a default I think that we fall into. But how do we define it in terms of something that's more positive? And I think defining it as something that happens for two people when they are creating the bond, and that's an ongoing thing in a relationship. It's interesting to think about the bond as happening when you first begin, like you put glue on two things and stick it together and now it's stuck. Well, over time, that glue can age and it can work its way apart. And relationships being what they are, they're about two people having a connection. These things need to be worked on. And this is not new, but I think what we really want to reemphasize here is how we make ourselves conscious to that, and how even when we're not necessarily thinking it's romance, it is. So if you're sort of blind to the idea that sometimes romance is happening in front of you and you don't realize it, well, here's an opportunity to refocus, to shed a new light on it. And in the interest of defining it as something that happens, that builds on the relationship, that builds on the connection, it could happen at any time. A romantic thought is something that makes us, I think, feel good when you're thinking about your significant other. It's about being close and being able to hug and feeling affection. Broaden that definition, or broaden that concept of romance being at any time you can spend with that person. So it's obviously something to do with time spent, and that's very valuable. It's sometimes for a guy, you think you're being romantic because you're thinking of the woman, and you want points for that. And I certainly have fallen into that category where when you're a busy person, you have a lot of things that you're responsible for, and you tend to, because of the way you operate, you tend to give a lot of weight to someone saying nice things to you, and it's all about how it lands on the other person. If you're thinking that's being romantic and it's not reaching and it's not making its impact, then you got to really get to that person and find out what they like. But coming back to the example that I was beginning to illustrate, was romance could be going to the grocery store together because you're spending that time. And, the funny thing that you hear a lot is that women say men don't like to go shopping because guys are linear thinkers. They want to go in and get what they want and they want to leave. There obviously are a lot of guys out there that are like that. But I would venture to say that not every guy you would meet would fall into that category. Some guys like to go shopping. Some guys like to have a hand in what the woman picks, because if it's clothes shopping, let's say that. If it's clothes shopping, he would like her to see her in something hot, and he'd like to pick it. If you're going grocery shopping, it's not really a romantic thing per se. It's not a date. We don't make a date to go grocery shopping. But if you're with your friend, your partner, your significant other, and you're spending time doing that, that can be a romantic interlude. There's a lot that can come from that. Remember, it's the time being shared. It's that significant here. And it should land on the person that that's what it is, that this isn't just a chore, because there are plenty of things that fall into the category of chores in life, whether it's doing the laundry or cutting the grass or any of a number of things that don't evoke a lot of really great, fun type of emotions. But when you're doing it with the person who's your significant other, that's time together. See that as valuable. See that as something that you do because you value each other. And maybe afterwards you could have plans to have another part of the romance, which could be that sort of getaway for a while and leave your troubles behind. Just a thought. Here's something that comes that came to mind, and it is the thought of what is love, and when somebody says "I love you," or how do you respond to that? I remember thinking about that very question when it happened, and obviously it's probably longer ago than I can, than I want to say. But the idea of saying that you love someone or somebody saying "I love you," it evoked all of these feelings of, now there's tons of responsibility that I don't know that I can handle, or I didn't feel that I could handle, because it lends itself to the notions of everything is supposed to work out perfectly. You see it in television, and obviously a lot of our images of things are what's presented to us. You see it in ads, you see it in television. That's a big influence, and or whether it's streaming, multimedia, however you get your entertainment. That's a lot of our concept of how love is. And what we find, say maybe before we ever get in love, what we find is, when we see it depicted in so many different ways, we see a lot of the negative things that come out. You see all the heartbreak, and you see the cheating and the lying and everything that goes on with that. And it makes the thought of love or being in love very scary. Because how do you navigate all of those kinds of things? And frankly, I can find 1,000 reasons why people would want to avoid admitting that they're in love, because it seems to be there's so many pitfalls to it. Like I say, there are songs created about it, and there's some songs that talk about how love takes you to these highs, and then there are songs that talk about how love just makes you feel miserable. And every day a new song comes out about the very subject. But it's fascinating when you study it from the standpoint of psychology or anthropology or sociology. But again, when we're talking about love and what it does to you, how you respond to it, how you act, I'm talking about it from the aspect of people that seem to reject embracing it because of the fear connected with it. There are some things in terms of love that you're just sort of born into. For example, the parent-child sort of relationship, the sibling sort of relationship. It just sort of operates before you ever have a chance to define it. I mean, you're parent and you have a child, you're bonded, you're connected. You don't even think twice about it. When you're doing this with another person and they're the object of your affection, then the definition of love, it obviously has a different shift. It's a different kind of love. And how do we get past those uncomfortable feelings to be able to embrace what comes along and share the experience? Because there's the romantic love, there's the friendship, there's a parent. All of these different types of love have different names. The friendship love, where it's not the romance, it's not the physical intimacy, it's just you're two people that have known each other for a while and you share a bond because there's familiarity and you like a lot of the same things and that's great. You support each other. But again, this isn't the physical intimacy kind of, that's just a friendship. There's that kind of love. And that can last a long, 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 long time, till death do they part. And then you have the kind of love where it's more romance-based, and that's the one I want to talk about now, and how uncomfortable that can make you feel. Well, I think that uncomfortableness happens because there are so many things that are undefined, and you feel a huge amount of responsibility, as well you should, because we are dealing with emotions here. We're dealing with another person, and letting someone else down is something we're trained to believe is a bad thing. Well, I think as you're listening to this, and if you're thinking about how you love someone and they're not mirroring back that same sort of intensity, think about what's going on in their head. I think they may feel love for you, or they just may be afraid to step out of their comfort zone for fear of failure. And that happens to a lot of people. You think about, again, talking about the examples that we see about love, how it's depicted in the movies and television and in songs. Certainly the divorce rate, depending upon your age group, is fairly high. We're talking somewhere around 50%. That makes being in love seem sort of risky. And in one of my podcasts, I talked about how to deal with, or how do you have long-term relationships. And I talked to people who've been in long-term relationships, and I'm talking those that are in the 20, 25, 30, 35-year range, and the ups and downs of the relationship over those years. I mean, it was never just simply bliss. You go through things, and it's about learning how to stick together, learning how to support the other person, even though you're frustrated, mad, and whatever else may come. But know that those things will pass, and that it happens on both sides, because no one is perfect. And we talked about passive aggressive and how people can do those kinds of things because they come up in long-term relationships. But that was for another podcast. But in the interest of understanding that you won't have all the answers to anything when you first start out with a person, or when you're declaring your love for someone. It's something you just kind of throw your hat in the ring, and you deal with the emotions, the feelings, the things that come up as they occur. Certainly, it's scary. It's a lot of responsibility, but it's kind of like some things that once you get over the newness of it, you kind of settle into it, and then you just operate. Then you just handle it on a day-to-day basis, and then you get more comfortable with it. I think it's just another way of saying that. I had a friend of mine who I'd known for a few years. He had married his girlfriend. They had been together for a number of years and decided to tie the knot. And when talking with him about it, he said he just kind of shared, well, it was the thing to do. And I don't mean that in a way that just was just the next step. It's that they really felt comfortable with each other. They had prior relationships and had experienced the ups and downs, in having been through that, and then being in the experience of each other. They had obviously been through their roller coaster, but really learned how to be together. And that being together meant, whether it was doctor's appointments or the stressors of coming home every day after work, or what are we eating for dinner, or we got to take the dog to the vet, or the cat, whatever those things were, those day-to-day operations, they learned being together that they could work it out. And I think that's an interesting thing when you don't know when you start out in a relationship with somebody that those things are going to happen. I think you hope for the best. And if you're thinking long term, and that's the thing about some people. Some people don't know how to think long term. So if you're a long term thinker and you find out that the person you're with isn't, then you're probably going to be in the business of introducing a lot of these concepts to them. And it may be a little scary because things may seem very helter-skelter. They're going to seem like they're committed, then they're not committed. Are they in? Are they not in? And that can be a bit nerve-wracking. Maybe your relationship might not survive that, and you might have to move on to someone else who's a little more thoughtful in that regard. But those are some of the things that you start out with, and you figure it out along the way. But back to the story about my friend who with his long-term girlfriend, and they finally got married. They've always been a great couple. They're very generous with their time and their love and affection for their friends, and it was great as a friend to see them come together and make that lifetime commitment. So hats off to those that are able to do that. For me, I think it can start out as being very scary, not because it's a bad thing, but because I think about the responsibility that one takes on when you declare your love for someone. I think that's great when you can give of yourself in that way and want to take on the responsibility. And that's wonderful, because being able to be and to want to be responsible to and care about someone else is a beautiful thing. The role model that I have is my mother, and she did such a wonderful job of loving people, making them feel wanted, and the thought of being able to make somebody that happy is, it's hard to be able to live up to that example, which sort of makes me, it's just one of those quirky things. I would like to do it as well as she did. In my lifetime, I have failed miserably at being good at loving other people. I have tried, but I've also learned that communication is one of those things that I was not very good at for a very long time. I still struggle with it at times. And how other people perceive my actions in terms of love. And one of my podcasts, I talked about love languages. I had to learn a great deal, not only about my style of loving, but what it's like for the other person. And, this can apply to not only romantic relationships, but even those with friends, your children, your parents, taking on that responsibility of someone else's emotions is and can be a very, very scary thing, because sometimes you don't know what you get. You don't know what you're getting into, and time reveals those things. But I'm of the hope that love, giving and receiving, ultimately is going to be a worthwhile experience for you. So that's my thought on that. And I'm going to take a short break, and we'll be back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello there, and welcome back. I'm John Johnson, and you're listening to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. And the next thing I want to talk about is I'm going to kind of focus this on, someone who might be more of the younger listeners. And your experience in relationships obviously is impacted by your peers, things that you see, as much as all of us are. And, the conversation comes up from time to time about young romance in what it really entails. Invariably, when you are young, you are experiencing things that you've never experienced before. Hormones are raging, and it's about what to do with those. Parents struggle with this sort of thing all the time, and it's about chaperones and setting limits and how to trust and all kinds of things. You get those experiences, and then you grow up and have kids of your own. But the conversation about sex obviously comes up a lot because young people they're growing. You've got hormones and you're trying to figure out what to do with these things. Teachers see this all the time. But the thing that I want to put out there is sex is not necessarily love. I think we teach that about sexuality, and when it happens in a relationship, it is supposed to be symbolic of love because of the power of procreation, that is to create babies, and therefore responsibility that's connected to that. And because of that, we like to associate sex with love and that, as I've just shared. But what I'm here to explain is when you're young and you don't have that background to operate from, sometimes you think sex equals love. And I think until you've actually have experienced life to where you see the dynamics that happen from that perspective of having years on this earth, having responsibility and things other than sexual urges, you don't really know what love is in terms of how to relate it to sex and commitment and the responsibilities that go with that. And this is a big question because when you cross that bridge, when you become physically intimate with someone, there are certainly a lot of things that are going to happen emotionally that you have never experienced before, and you're going to struggle with dealing with because not only because it's new, but it's now who can you trust that can give you reliable, sincere guidance. People struggle with this all the time. Adults struggle with it. That's why they have counselors that they go see. People have been in marriages for years and they struggle with this sort of thing. So when young people have these kinds of questions, it's like, who do you turn to? Parents like to be in on these conversations because they want to have an influence. They want to protect their kids, and they have a vested interest in their kids doing well. So if you're a young person and you're struggling with some of these, I think parents are a good resource. There's also the part that some parents are not well equipped to handle these kinds of questions. Clearly, some of them have struggled with it in their own lives, so they're not necessarily the best example. There's school counselors. There are therapists. These people are trained in behavior, and they can give you some very sage advice. There are pastors in churches. There are lots of resources. You can look online for information. Thank goodness for being able to read, and we have access to things right at our fingertips. Those are some sources where you can begin to get answers to questions about life. And it's good that you're asking questions because you need to be able to do that. And learning not only to ask questions, but also to get answers is a skill that you're going to take with you the rest of your life. But back to this question about sex equals love. It does not. And we would like it to. I think that's a fantastic concept. But what we tend to learn is oftentimes it definitely means different things from different people. It is such a powerful thing to want that people will lie to get it. And there's nothing new about that. But if you're on the end of that where you feel shortchanged or you feel betrayed, then there's obviously a lot of hurt involved in that. And that's why decisions around the topic of sex and young people is such a very important thing to talk about and not to sweep under the rug. And I'm talking about it aside from, the sexually transmitted diseases. I mean, there's certainly lots of conversation on that, but I'm talking about the psychological aspect of what young people go through. And those of you that have to be listening to the podcast, thank you for listening. I hope you take that into account as to, I'm talking about something other than the health aspect, but I'm talking about the mental, emotional part of it. So, that having been said, choose your partners wisely and be an observer. Actions speak. It's not always with the words. Words are one thing, but watch their actions. That's going to tell you more about a person than they can tell you about themselves. Which leads me to the segue about peer pressure. Now, young people, we all deal with it. Peer pressure. It's in some aspects, peer pressure it could be a good thing because it's designed to kind of keep us in a box, to keep us responsible. But the other part about it, and this is where, if you're a parent, where you're concerned about peer pressure, it's when it takes the behavior of your child, your loved person, and makes them do things that they ordinarily wouldn't do, things that are irresponsible. And that's the worry that parents have. So if you're a young person listening, I'm going to be talking from both positions here, one as a parent and then talking to you as a young person. If you're experiencing peer pressure, the peer pressure that parents worry about is that their kids experimenting with sex, drugs, maybe reckless or dangerous driving habits, taking risks, risky behavior, that sort of thing, something that puts you in danger. And that's always a parent's fear, because parents don't want their children to be hurt. I wouldn't want you to be hurt. And it's how do you deal with those sorts of things? Well, the easy part is if you have healthy boundaries to begin with, then you kind of know when you're encroaching into those areas because you feel uncomfortable. But if you've never really thought about this subject, and then you find yourself in a situation where it obviously makes you sort of feel strange, it sort of creeps you out, how do you handle that? You really have to go inside of yourself and decide, I have to say no. I have to stop this. I have to call a halt to this. And understand that it is perfectly okay for you to say no. Putting yourself at risk any further, because life is a learning experience, and you will run into situations where you obviously can't know the outcome. You don't know that it's going a certain direction, and then you reach a spot where you say, okay, this has to stop. You have to take it upon yourself to be courageous in those moments and protect yourself, because those are defining moments for you in life. And knowing that you do have that permission. You give yourself that permission. Nobody else has to do it for you. That you can call a halt to this, turn this around, go backwards. And if it means that you have to be on your own amongst a crowd of people to resist the peer pressure, then you will face that and be courageous. Of course, it's difficult, but there are a lot of things that are difficult about life. But by taking a stand, you are representing yourself, and you're needing to say to yourself that you are important. It's not what other people tell you to do, but it's what's important for yourself, and to be able to have those boundaries. And I think when you are able to take a step back and look at sometimes the dangerous situations that people put themselves in because of peer pressure, because they're afraid to say no, again, you should be celebrated for your independence and being able to do that. If necessary, after something like that is over, journal it in a diary so that you can get those feelings out. Talk to somebody about what you went through so that you can feel supported, and that if anything were to come of that, like say, for example, they say you chickened out or whatever, you need to be able to have your support persons in your life and not feel like you're so alone, because it's in those moments, like I say, those are defining moments in your life, and you'll always remember those. And being able to step back from the ledge on occasions like that and save yourself is an important life skill that you will be able to take with you wherever you are. Okay? So again, be courageous. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and until next time.